used to think the wilderness only held bears and wolves. Until the morning I stepped out of my tent in the frozen Selkirk Mountains and saw a footprint nearly 18 inches long pressed into the snow. That was the moment I realized I wasn't alone. The truth is, countless hikers have vanished in these woods, not because of storms or wild animals, but because of something science refuses to acknowledge. I've spent years trekking through brutal terrain, surviving over 40 expeditions, but this time, after losing my wife and my dog, I went deep into the mountains seeking silence. What I found instead was terror. In the next few minutes, I'll show you what I discovered. Primitive markings carved into stone, evidence of creatures standing nearly 10 feet tall, and the coordinated hunting tactics that nearly ended my life in less than 72 hours. I carried proof back with me, 2 photographs the creatures themselves chose not to destroy. In one, a massive figure watches me from across a frozen lake. In the other, it charges straight at my camera. They could have killed me. Instead, they left my gear in ruins but spared the camera, as if they wanted me to share their existence. If you turn away now, you'll never see what I saw, and you'll never know the truth that still stalks the Selkirk wilderness. I was already 50 miles deep into the Selkirk when the last bar of cell signal blinked out. Didn't matter, I hadn't planned on anyone calling. I wasn't running from something, I was walking into it. That difference. It matters. Most folks head out here to escape. I came out here to remember, to feel again. Or maybe just to make peace with the silence that never quite left after she did. The truck rattled over frozen gravel, headlights slicing through veils of falling snow. On the passenger seat lay an old photo, creases worn deep from years of folding and unfolding. Her smile still made my chest tighten. Chester's too, tongue out, ears perked. My boy, my dog. I reached over, thumb brushing across the image like it might bring them closer somehow. The heater groaned, working hard against the cold creeping through the glass. Everything else was quiet, too quiet. The forest around me wasn't the kind that welcomed noise. No birdsong, no rustle. Just the long hum of the tires and the occasional groan from the engine. When I turned off the main road and hit the trailhead, the world just stopped. Snow deeper here, untouched. My kind of place. I parked under a crooked pine, engine idling for a moment longer than necessary. My breath fogged the windshield. I shut it off. The world swallowed the sound like it never happened. My boots crunched into the snow as I stepped out. Wind swept in across the frozen lake behind the trees, low and steady like a warning whispered too low to catch. I didn't need a welcome. I'd been here before, years ago, with her, before the fire, before the war inside me. The wooden sign was still there, mostly tilted, splintered, half buried in the snow. Wilderness beyond this point. Enter at your own risk. Someone had carved a crude X through the word risk. I smiled, just barely. At least it was honest. By mid-afternoon, I'd made it a few miles up and pitched camp near the edge of a frozen lake. The trees arched overhead like cathedral beams, and the snow muted everything into a slow, heavy hush. I built the fire deliberately, tight, focused, no wasted motion. Old habits, the kind that came from years of survival training and nights spent counting breaths in the dark. The fire crackled to life, casting long shadows across the snow. I sat back, dug out my notebook, and began to write. Not because I expected anyone to read it, but because if something did happen, if this trip didn't end the way I planned, there'd at least be a trace of me left behind. Day 1. Temperature 12 degrees. Wind steady out of the northwest. Set camp near Clearwater Edge. Fire stable. No sign of wildlife. None. Not even crows. Feels off. I paused, pen hovering. I added, silence is too perfect. Like something watching the whole time but not breathing. I closed the book and leaned back against my pack. Snow began to fall again, fine and slow. I stared into the fire, letting the heat soak into my face, listening to the wood pop and hiss. I should have felt comfort in the warmth. Instead, it made the quiet feel louder. I reached for the flask in my coat pocket, took a sip, let it burn down into my chest. For a moment, I swore I heard Chester's low grumble beside me like he used to when the wind shifted weird. But there was nothing, just the trees creaking under the weight of snow and the fire. And then a sound, faint, sharp, a single crack from somewhere deeper in the woods. Not a branch snapping, something else, like a response, like the fire had spoken first and now the woods answered. I froze, the flask halfway to my mouth. Nothing moved, not even the wind. I looked past the firelight into the black. My breath clouded, white and thin, fading fast. My fingers wrapped tighter around the flask. My heart beat slower, heavier. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. That ancient awareness that something out there was paying attention. Later, tucked inside the tent, I couldn't sleep. I lay still, eyes open, listening. Not for danger, for patterns. For anything that might explain why my gut felt tight and the skin on my neck prickled every time the wind blew across the canvas. I reached for the photo again. The edges bent easily like muscle memory. Her face smiled back at me from the faint light of the lantern. Chester's too. "I won't let it happen again," I whispered. The tent walls barely stirred, but it felt like something heard me. Morning broke in silence. Not even the distant crack of ice shifting on the lake. I stepped out, breath clouding, stretching tight muscles. Snow had fallen heavy overnight, burying most of the ground. But that's what made it easy to see. Tracks. Not mine, not human, not bear. Just there, beyond the tree line. A line of them, deep, wide, too wide. I followed them a few yards, boots crunching slow, deliberate. I knelt beside one and pressed my hand into the snow just next to it. My fingers didn't reach either side. The print was at least twice as long as my boot, with 5 deep impressions and a strange arch. Not clawed like a cat, not flat like a boot. It sank down a full 3 inches deeper than my own step. It wasn't just big, it was heavy. Heavy like something that walked upright. Deliberate, not panicked, not stumbling. I stood slowly, eyes scanning the woods. No movement, no sound. I pulled out the small camera clip to my chest and snapped a few shots. Then I looked up and froze. It's branches. Broken, way up high. One of the pines nearby had a fresh snap at least 12 feet off the ground. The wood was bright and torn, like something had gripped it and twisted, not cracked by weight or wind. Another tree bore a strange marking. A long spiral groove that ran around the trunk like a barber pole. I touched it. Cold, smooth, too clean for weather, too odd for coincidence. Then I saw it, caught in the bark where the spiral ended. A hair, black, thick, almost coarse. I bagged it carefully in a small plastic sleeve and tucked it into my coat. My breath came faster now, not from exertion, from the realization this wasn't some fluke. Something had been out here, and it had moved through this place like it belonged to it. When I returned to camp, my fire was still smoking low. Nothing stolen, nothing ruined, but the snow was disturbed. A new set of tracks, not over mine, beside them, running parallel, like something had been walking with me. I stood there, eyes fixed on the ground, wind whispering through the trees. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just let the thoughts settle deep into my bones. I wasn't the one doing the watching anymore. That night, in the cold flicker of firelight, I opened my journal again. My fingers trembled just slightly. Day 2, I wrote. I think I'm not alone out here, not in the metaphorical sense, not the way grief lingers. I mean, really not alone. I'm being watched. I closed the journal, and the woods once again listened. It was just after first light when I stepped out of the tent, steam rising from my breath in quiet pulses. The fire had gone cold in the night, leaving behind a hushed bed of coals under a thin crust of ash. Everything felt still, like the woods were holding their breath. I adjusted the strap of my pack, stretched my shoulder, and started toward the ridge. I hadn't planned to hike far that morning, just to the north edge of the lake and back, but something pulled at me. Not curiosity, not yet. Just a weight in the air that hadn't settled since the night before. I took my time. Snow was clean and undisturbed as far as I could see. But then I rounded a bend near a cluster of cedar and stopped. It was impossible to miss. A trail, not from deer, not elk, not bear, not even remotely. The tracks were enormous, each one at least twice the length of my own boot, pressed deep into the snow with toes like wide, spread fingers. No claw marks, no drag, just clean steps. And they moved in a perfect line, one foot in front of the other, bipedal. Whatever made them walked upright, balanced, heavy. But it wasn't just the size, it was the spacing. Each stride cleared nearly 4 feet. No creature I knew of left prints like that, not in this part of the country, not in this world really. I crouched low, ran a gloved finger along the ridge of a print. The snow was compressed tight but not melted. The edges sharp, fresh, maybe within the last few hours. My breath caught. I looked up, following the line of tracks. They curved off through the trees over a rise, out of view. My instincts said to turn back. I followed them anyway. The forest thickened. Snow fell in light flakes now, barely more than dust catching on the edges of my hood. I moved slow, quiet, boots crunching just enough to let something know I was there if it cared. No birds, no squirrels, not even wind. Only the dry creak of old trunks shifting as I pressed forward. Then I saw it. A pine snapped clean at 12, maybe 13 feet off the ground. Not a break from weight. This was something else. The splintering was jagged, raw, like it had been twisted until it gave. The exposed wood looked pale and fresh against the dark bark, the resin still wet in the cold air. Something had done that on purpose. A few feet away, I found another tree, this one untouched but marked. A long, spiraling groove like a giant screw had been bored through the bark. It wrapped around the trunk, unnaturally even, ending in a sharp gouge. No animal does that. I don't know what does that, but the sight of it sent a shiver through my ribs like someone tapping on bone. I stepped closer. That's when I saw the hair, one long strand. Dark, glossy black, coarse like horsehair but thicker. It clung to the bark at the base of the spiral as if snagged by something passing. I reached for a sample kit out of habit, old training, bagged it without thinking too much. My hands moved automatically, but my mind was miles away. There was intelligence behind this, I could feel it. It wasn't just some freak of nature. Someone was out here, and they didn't want to be seen, but they sure as hell didn't mind being noticed. I started back toward camp. Snow had picked up again, light but steady, covering some of the trail. I kept my eyes low, tracing my prints, scanning for anything out of place. And that's when it hit me. There were 2 sets of tracks, mine and another. Same size, same shape, same depth. Walking beside mine, not over them, mirroring. It hadn't followed me back, it had walked with me. I froze. Every hair on my body stood on end. I scanned the woods behind me. Nothing. But that didn't mean it wasn't there. The air felt wrong again, too still. The kind of stillness that settles in before a storm or after something dies. I swallowed hard and kept moving, one step at a time, careful not to run. Running makes you pray. When I reached the edge of camp, I stopped just outside the fire ring and looked around. Everything was just as I'd left it. Tent closed, gear untouched, nothing knocked over. But the snow. Something had disturbed the snow. Around the camp, I saw faint impressions. Not full prints, just pressure marks. Almost like it had tiptoed through the perimeter, circling, watching. It had been close. Too close. I sat down by the fire pit and started stacking kindling with trembling fingers. The lighter clicked twice before the flame caught. The warmth that spread didn't reach my spine. I poured a bit of whiskey into my tin cup and stared out past the flickering edge of light into the trees now shrouded in mist again. The fog always came fast in these parts, but this time it felt heavier, hungrier. I lit the lantern, moved it closer to the tent, and zipped myself inside. I sat cross-legged with the journal on my lap, flashlight clipped overhead. My breath felt thin, my hands cramped from cold and something else I didn't want to name yet. I opened to a new page and started writing. Day 3, weather steady, snowfall moderate, wildlife still absent. Found tracks, large, upright, bipedal, not human, not bear, fresh. Snapped tree at unusual height, spiral markings, collected hair sample, possible territorial sign. Something is watching me. Closely. I paused, pen hovering. They're not hunting, not yet, just studying. I underlined that last part slowly, twice. I closed the book and leaned back. The silence outside pressed in again. It was suffocating in a way I couldn't explain. Like the forest itself was leaning closer, waiting to see what I'd do next. I thought of Chester then, his low growl in the dark, the way his body used to press against mine when the world felt too wide. I missed that weight, that warmth. I whispered his name under my breath, and for a heartbeat I swore I heard a soft huff just beyond the tent wall. Not wind, not snow, breath. But when I pulled the zipper open and looked out, nothing was there. Only the snow and my prints and another set right beside them, heading back into the trees. It started around midnight. I'd been lying awake, listening to the wind slide through the trees like it always did, low and patient, sometimes catching on the tarp overhead. The fire had burned low outside, just faint embers pulsing behind the canvas, and I was staring up at the top of the tent where frost had begun to form. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses in, muffles everything, even your thoughts. I thought I'd gotten used to that kind of quiet, but this was different. I shifted in my sleeping bag, trying not to make noise I didn't need to make. I don't know why. It just felt like something was listening. Then the sound came. Not loud, not right away. Just a low rumble, almost like distant thunder, but too steady, too drawn out. I held my breath, trying to make sense of it. It rose, deep and throaty, vibrating in my chest like standing too close to a diesel engine. But it wasn't mechanical, it wasn't anything like that. It was alive, a howl maybe. But not any kind I'd heard before. It was longer, richer, like it didn't belong to a single animal but came from somewhere older, bigger, deeper. The pitch climbed slightly near the end, then dropped off sharp, like something yanking the breath out mid-note. I sat up, slow, careful, reached for the camera. The infrared unit was already set near the fire ring, pointed at the edge of the trees. I'd mounted it that afternoon after finding the second trail. Something about the way those prints mirrored mine had stuck with me, like someone whispering my name just out of reach. My hands moved on instinct, clicking the monitor on, thumbing through the stored frames. Static, black, then motion. A single shape moved across the screen, just a silhouette, no definition, but it was there. Upright, fast, broad shoulders, no sound from the snow, not even a crunch, just the sudden jerk of a shadow passing between trees like it belonged to the dark. I stared at the playback, backed it up, watched again. Frame by frame. Still couldn't tell what I was looking at, but it didn't feel like something I could shrug off. I could lie to myself and say it was a bear standing up. But bears don't move like that, not with that grace, that speed, that purpose. I turned off the monitor and leaned back against the tent wall. The air was thin inside, stale from breath and tension. I zipped open the front just enough to see out. The trees were still, no wind now. The fire glowed dull red. That's when I saw the shape, real this time, not on a screen. It moved just beyond the light's reach, not rushing, not hiding, just moving. I held my breath again. Everything in me said, don't blink. My hand found the flashlight slowly, fingers trembling. I clicked it on and swept the beam across the clearing. Nothing, just snow, smoke, my breath bouncing back at me. But then came another sound, not from the woods, from the tent. The canvas shifted slightly, not from wind, from pressure, like a hand dragging lightly across it. I spun, heart leaping, and pressed a palm flat against the fabric. Cold, no movement now, just stillness. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. I'd felt it, I'd heard it. Something had touched the tent. Not hard, not violent, just a brush, like checking for a heartbeat. I sat frozen for minutes. Could have been 10. Could have been 1. Time stopped being useful. Eventually I crawled out slow, boots crunching soft against the ice-crusted snow. The fire had dropped to ash. I added a few small logs, just enough to bring light back without making smoke. Then I stood, and I listened. That sound again, farther now. Not a growl, not a call. A kind of knocking, rhythmic, deliberate. One knock, then another. A pause, then 2 more. From a different direction. My chest went tight. It was communication. I scanned the tree line. No movement, but I could feel the presence. Not one, more than one. Surrounding, testing. I didn't know what they wanted. I didn't know if they even knew I was aware. But they were there. I backed toward the tent, careful not to turn my back. My flashlight flickered, battery dying. I shut it off. Better to keep the dark honest. Inside, I pulled the zipper down partway, just enough to watch. An hour passed, maybe 2. Then the morning light started to seep through the canvas. Faint blue at first, then soft gray. I stepped out to a different camp. My gear was all still there, nothing missing, but everything was off. The cookware I'd stacked by the fire moved, not scattered, rearranged. My fuel canister had been shifted 6 inches to the left and turned 90 degrees. The tarp covering my food was folded back neatly, like someone had opened a present and left it untouched. The camera was still mounted, but the lens had been tilted slightly toward the trees. And there in the snow, not far from where I'd stacked firewood, was a small pile of stones. Stacked, deliberate. 7 in total, smooth river stones, even though I hadn't seen a running stream since the base of the ridge. Each one placed carefully, the largest on the bottom, smallest on top, balanced so precisely it made my stomach twist. I knelt beside it. No tracks around it, no drag marks, just the tower like it had grown there. I didn't touch it, didn't even breathe too hard near it. Instead, I backed away and scanned the trees again. Nothing, but I knew what it meant. It wasn't a warning, it was a message. We see you, and we want you to know we understand. Later that day, I walked out toward a clearing I'd marked on my map. The wind had picked up, howling soft through the pines. I stopped when I noticed something caught on a tree. A long piece of fabric, frayed and frozen, hanging like a ribbon. But it wasn't mine. I hadn't worn anything like that, and then I saw the blood. Not much. Just a smear. Dried, low to the ground, and beside it, a faint trail of prints. Smaller than the ones I'd seen before, still big, still heavy, but limping, uneven, and the others circling around it, protecting it. That's when I knew. They weren't just watching, they were guarding something, or someone, and I'd walked straight into it. That night I sat by the fire and stared into the flame without blinking. The cold didn't bite the way it had before. I didn't write anything in the journal. I didn't reach for the camera. I just watched the shadows move across the snow and listened to the trees creak. And I whispered to the dark, "You're not animals, are you?" The woods didn't answer, but I already knew. It was the cold that woke me. Not the usual bite of morning air through the tent walls, but something sharper, colder than before. Hollow, like the forest had exhaled and never drawn breath again. I lay still for a moment, ears searching for sound. Nothing. Not even the wind. Just an unnatural hush that settled into my bones and made every inch of me feel watched. I unzipped the tent with slow hands, stepped out, boots sinking into untouched snow, and scanned the tree line. There were no fresh tracks, no signs of movement, but I could feel it, that weight in the silence pressing against my ribs like a warning. It wasn't over. It had never even begun. I needed to move. Sitting still too long out here makes your mind fray at the edges. I packed light, just the essentials: water, notebook, sidearm, extra batteries, and the camera. I set off toward the ridge, not following a trail this time, but letting instinct guide me. The sun was up but hidden. A dull gray light seeped through the clouds, flattening everything. No shadows, no warmth. Just shapes in fog and snow. I passed the stone pile again, still there, untouched. But something about it felt different, like it had aged overnight, lost its precision. Or maybe I had just stared too long the first time. Either way, I didn't linger. By midday, I'd reached the edge of a slope I hadn't seen on my map. It dipped steeply into a shallow basin lined with pines and deadfall. And there, tucked beneath a rock overhang blackened with age and soot, was the mouth of a cave. Low, narrow, almost hidden by a curtain of root and snow. I stood above it for a long time. Something in me screamed to turn back. Not fear exactly, just recognition. Like when you smell fire but haven't seen the smoke yet. I climbed down slowly, keeping to the firmer snow. The opening was tight enough that I had to crouch to get in, my back scraping damp stone. The air shifted instantly. Cold, yes, but stale. Thick, like stepping into a sealed tomb. I clicked on my headlamp, the beam slicing through the dark in tight strokes. The floor was uneven, littered with rocks and what I first thought were sticks until I looked closer. Bones, small ones near the entrance. Rabbit, maybe squirrel. But deeper in, the remains grew larger. Elk, deer, something canine, scattered, picked clean. No signs of tooth marks, no signs of struggle, just old bones, stripped and set aside like trash. I pressed forward, the space widening slightly. The walls were smooth in some places, gouged in others, like claws or stone tools had worked them. I passed a corner and stopped. The chamber opened up, not wide, just enough to stand. And at the far end, against the curve of the back wall, was something I still can't fully describe. A nest, that's the only word that fits. A mound of leaves, fur, moss, all matted into a thick bed pressed into the stone. Beside it, scratch marks, deep ones. 4 long grooves repeated in rows, not haphazard, almost rhythmic, and above them, symbols. They weren't letters, they weren't pictures either, just shapes etched into the wall, worn down by time or hands. Circles, angles. Some looked like stick figures half-formed. Others reminded me of cave paintings I'd seen in a book years ago. Something primal, something older than this country. I reached for my camera, lifted it slowly, and took a single shot. The flash lit up the chamber for half a second, and that's when I heard it, a breath, not mine. From deeper in the dark, heavy, measured, I froze. Another breath closer, wet. I turned off the flash, switched to infrared. Nothing on the screen, but the sound hadn't stopped. It was asleep. Somewhere deeper inside that cave was something alive. Something that had brought down animals the size of trucks and left bones like breadcrumbs. My body wanted to run. Every muscle screamed to get out. But I couldn't move, because at that exact moment, something shifted outside. A silhouette passed in front of the cave mouth just for a second. Not rushing, just moving, massive, broad, upright. A single step and it was gone, but I knew what I'd seen. I was no longer alone, not even in the cave, and that meant whatever was sleeping wasn't alone either. I backed up slowly. No sudden moves, no noise. each step timed with the steady breath from the dark, as if syncing with a rhythm not my own. When I reached the narrow bend again, I held there, hand on the rock, forcing myself not to cry out. I could hear it now, the outside figure breathing too, heavy, like the one inside. Only this one wasn't asleep. It was waiting. I pulled out the sidearm, kept it low, not out of aggression, just instinct and fear, honest fear. I slid along the wall, hugging it as tight as I could. The light flickered. Once. Twice. Then held. I reached the entrance, heart pounding so hard I thought it might echo, and there, at the mouth of the cave, I saw it. 2 feet, standing just beyond the curtain of root and snow. Bah, dark skin thick like leather, toes wide and splayed for grip, not a sound, not a twitch. Just presence. I didn't breathe. Then they moved. A step back, another, quiet, deliberate. I didn't wait. I bolted out, low to the ground, scrambling up the slope with cold in my throat and rocks slicing my hands. I didn't stop until I reached the ridgeline, turned and looked back down. The mouth of the cave was empty, but I could feel eyes on me. I didn't go back to camp right away. I didn't trust the woods not to close behind me like a mouth. I walked wide, circled for miles, every crack of twig a hammer in my chest. The sun was fading when I finally stumbled into camp. I dropped to my knees, fingers frozen, breath in pieces. I didn't light a fire that night, didn't eat. I just sat inside the tent, knees pulled to my chest, replaying every breath from that cave over and over. I thought of Chester, the way he used to nudge my shoulder when he sensed something I couldn't. And for a second I wished he was there, if only to tell me I wasn't going insane. I didn't sleep. Not really. Just waited. Waited for the sound of that breath to find me again in the dark. The morning after the cave, I didn't speak. Not even to myself. My mouth felt dry and useless. There was a numbness in my limbs that wasn't from the cold. My brain had slowed down, like it was still trapped in that tight stone chamber, still waiting to exhale. I moved through camp on muscle memory. Checked my gear, stirred cold ash. No appetite, no coffee, just motion. I didn't write in the journal, the pen would have felt too heavy. Or maybe I was just afraid that putting it down would make everything real. I'd slept maybe an hour, sitting up in my tent with my back to the entrance, holding the sidearm with the safety off, waiting for a sound that never came. That kind of silence gets inside you, starts rearranging things. But when I finally stepped outside, something was different. The air wasn't still anymore. It was curious. Not playful, but lighter somehow. As if the woods were aware I'd been somewhere I wasn't meant to be, and had come back changed. I walked to the tree line, scanned for movement. Still nothing. No birds, no tracks. But the wind had picked up and I could smell something faint riding on it. Pine. Damp fur. A trace of earth like overturned soil. I turned my head slowly. It wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from my tent. I moved quick but quiet, bootsteps slicing through crusted snow. The canvas flap was still shut. No tears, no slashes. But something had been there. The snow around it was pressed down in large, uneven ovals. Not prints, just weight. Too heavy to be human. Too careful to leave clean tracks. I crouched beside the tent and noticed something else. Rocks, a dozen of them this time, arranged carefully in front of the entrance like a pattern. Concentric circles maybe, or waves. Some had markings scratched into them. I didn't recognize any symbols, but I felt them, like they pulsed with quiet thought. Not random, intentional. And then I saw the pack, my backpack. It had been moved. Not stolen, not torn open, just unzipped and laid open flat like someone had been studying it. My clothes were untouched. So was the map. But my notebook, my journal, had been flipped open. The pen lay across the pages, the one I hadn't touched since before the cave. It was open to the entry about the stone pile. That was no accident. I picked it up slowly. The wind rustled the page. For a second, I imagined fingers had turned it, heavy, careful fingers. I packed the notebook away and stepped back, trying not to disturb the rocks. I didn't want to interrupt whatever conversation was happening, because that's what it felt like now. Not a haunting, not a chase, a dialogue, unspoken, measured. I didn't speak out loud, but I nodded, as if to say, I see you. I spent the rest of the day walking, not far. Just a loop around the basin to clear my head and watch for signs. The snow was still clean, but I found 2 more stone arrangements about half a mile out. One near a fallen log. The other tucked into the crook of a tree root. Both different, both deliberate. The second one had something else beside it. Blood. Not a lot, just a few droplets in the snow, brown around the edges like it had dried in the cold. They led off into the trees, not far. I followed them by instinct, not curiosity. That's when I found the claw mark on the birch tree, low to the ground, sharp, deep. Something had been here, something hurt. But the strange part wasn't the blood. It was the way the snow was disturbed nearby, like a scuffle had happened, then been smoothed out, covered, erased. Something had protected it, and something had watched over the cover-up. I felt eyes again. Not close, but not far. I turned in a slow circle. The air was still now. The sky had gone pale. Snow flurries whispered across the ridge like static, and the woods, they didn't feel angry. They felt tense, protective. I walked back to camp in silence, watching every tree. That night I built the fire higher, not out of fear, but out of respect. I wanted them to see it, to understand that I wasn't hiding, that I knew this was their place, not mine. I sat close to the flames, warming my hands, watching the shadows stretch and twist in the dark like branches reaching for answers. At some point I heard it again. Not a howl, not a knock, just a slow breath, somewhere past the clearing. It wasn't alone. There were 2 more after that, spaced out, surrounding but not closing in. Watching. I didn't move. Didn't reach for the gun. I just whispered, "You're not here for me, are you?" The wind shifted slightly. A long gust stirred the smoke toward the edge of the woods, and there it was. A shape, broad, tall, backlit by moonlight, barely visible through the mist and the firelight. It stood still, then turned, and disappeared behind the trees like smoke retreating into lungs. But it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like an answer. I stayed up the rest of the night, writing, listening, thinking. At dawn, I stepped out to stretch and found something new. Another small pile of rocks. But this one was different. At its center was a tuft of black hair, like the strand I'd found near the spiral-marked tree. Beside it, a smear of blood, just a little, and one of my own glove liners, torn, not shredded, just opened, as if someone had tried to figure it out. Held it, studied it, then left it for me to find. I crouched down, breath tight, pulse steady. I didn't touch it. I just sat there for a long time, staring at the way the rocks curved around that glove like a gesture. That's when the thought hit me. Maybe something was hurt. One of them. Maybe the one I'd followed, or maybe a younger one, a smaller one, and the others, the ones who circled me, who rearranged my gear, who stood just at the edge of the dark. Maybe they were doing what I would have done for Chester if he was injured out here. They were guarding it, keeping watch, trying to understand if I was a threat or something else. That realization hit harder than anything in the cave. This wasn't just instinct, it was community. They weren't wild things acting on fear or hunger. They were a group, a unit, something bound together by more than survival. And now I was part of the equation. Not prey, not predator, just present. I looked up at the trees, and I whispered into the stillness, "I understand." The wind carried the smoke into the woods, and something shifted behind the silence. Not a sound, not a shape, just a presence moving further in, watching, waiting, and maybe deciding. It started with a knock, not the kind that comes from a tree branch falling or a rock shifting in the cold. This was deliberate, solid, measured, one knock, then another, and then more, spaced evenly from different directions. I sat by the fire staring into the orange light as the sound spread through the trees like a message passed hand to hand. There was no wind, no animals, just the rhythm of something alive and organized. I didn't reach for the gun, didn't grab the flashlight, I just listened. Because I knew this wasn't random, they were circling. Hey, the knocks grew louder, closer, then silence. That silence was worse than the knocking. It was too thick, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Then something snapped. Not a twig, not a branch, something bigger. I turned toward the sound just as a low groan drifted in from the trees. It wasn't pain, it wasn't aggression, it was warning. My body stiffened as I scanned the dark. The fire popped behind me, sparks hissed into the air. Then something moved across the clearing. I didn't see it fully, just a blur at the edge of light. Large, upright, gone as fast as it came. Then another knock, closer now, then another, different rhythm. They were communicating, not just with each other, with me. I felt it in my chest before I heard it. This low, breathy growl that didn't come from any direction I could pin down. It echoed through the trees and the snow like it bounced between things too large to see. Then another breath. Then stillness. That's when I noticed the smell. Copper, rot, musk. Like something had died but hadn't stopped moving. My hand drifted to the sidearm, rested there. Not to use it, just to remember it was there. I stood slowly, turned toward the woods. The smell was stronger now. My skin itched with the weight of it. I took one step, then two, then I saw it. Hanging from the lowest branch of a tree at least 15 feet off the ground. A deer. No, what was left of a deer. Suspended by its hind legs, throat torn open, ribs exposed. But it wasn't the gore that froze me, it was the precision. No predator did that. No bear climbs a tree just to leave its kill hanging like a warning sign. This wasn't about food. This was a message, a warning. The snow beneath the deer was untouched. No tracks. Just a dark pool of frozen blood and bone glinting in the moonlight. I backed away, slow, breath shallow, muscles tight. That's when the laughter started. Low, guttural, almost human. It came from the dark behind me, then the side, then again from a third point, like something circling with amusement. It wasn't playful, it was mocking. I turned in a slow circle, breath fogging the air. I whispered, "Okay, I get it." The laughter stopped. The air shifted. Then came the sound of feet, no hands, moving through the trees, not running, not stomping, climbing, pulling, shuffling, all around me. I stepped back toward camp, eyes scanning, skin crawling. I grabbed the camera from my pack and turned it on, flipping to night mode. I raised it, scanned, movement. 3 figures, just beyond the firelight, tall, still watching, not blinking. One stepped forward just enough for the lens to catch its silhouette. It was huge, 7 feet easy, broad shoulders, long arms hanging almost to its knees. Head slightly tilted. The eyes caught a sliver of red from the fire. They didn't shine like animal eyes. They absorbed the light, deep, unreadable, deep. The two behind it moved slightly, shifting weight from foot to foot. They weren't random. They were coordinated. I dropped the camera slowly, not wanting to break eye contact. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I didn't speak. I didn't move. The one in front took a single step closer, then stopped, raised its head slightly, and let out a sound I can still feel in my chest. A kind of click growl hum that vibrated through the trees like sonar. The other two backed away, then turned and vanished into the dark. The leader stayed a moment longer. Then it too slipped back into the trees, disappearing without a trace. No sound, no snow disturbed. Gone, and I stood there, alone, but not really, because the woods were still full of them. I didn't sleep that night. I packed up camp just before dawn. Couldn't stay in that clearing. Too many tracks now, too many signs. They'd let me stay this long, but something had shifted. I walked until my legs burned, following no trail, just moving, trying to get ahead of whatever came next. Around midday, I found something I didn't expect. A structure. Not a cabin. Not natural, made of logs, heavy. Woven together with branches and strips of bark. No nails, no rope, just pressure, balance, intelligence. It looked like a shelter. Tall enough to stand in. No door, just an opening. Inside, nothing, just snow and old leaves. But it wasn't abandoned. It had presence. The logs had been chosen, bent, shaped. Some had carvings like I'd seen in the cave. Marks I didn't understand, but my gut did. This wasn't a den. It was a gathering place. I stepped inside. The air felt heavier, like memory clung to the walls. I turned in a slow circle, letting my eyes adjust. Then I heard it again. Knocking, not around me this time. Below, like something in the ground. I dropped to one knee, pressed my hand to the earth. Vibration. Rhythm is deliberate. I stood slowly, backed out, looked around. Nothing, but the sound had stopped, and that silence had returned. Thicker now, as if they were deciding again whether I still belonged. I left the shelter behind, heart racing, and walked until the light changed and the sky turned orange with the threat of dusk. When I finally made camp again, somewhere farther north, higher elevation, I didn't light a fire. I didn't want them to see me. Not that it mattered. They already knew exactly where I was. I crawled into the tent, zipped it shut, and sat there, listening to the darkness press in. No wind, no laughter, only my breath. And somewhere in the night, far off but close enough to feel, a single knock. I ran until the cold burned my lungs, until the trees blurred and my legs forgot they were supposed to stop. Snow flew up in bursts behind me, knees buckling through crusted patches of ice. I didn't know which direction I was headed anymore, just away. From the shelter, from the laughter, from the knock that echoed too deep in my bones. My flashlight flickered as I moved, battery drained, beam cutting through trees that all looked the same. Nothing but black trunks and white ground, over and over like I'd been dropped inside a loop. I didn't stop until my body collapsed on its own. I hit the snow hard, rolled onto my back and stared up at a sky choked with clouds. No stars, no moon, just a long stretch of nothing above me. My breath came in gasps. Every exhale turned to steam and vanished as fast as it came. I was shaking, not just from the cold this time. Something had shifted last night, something permanent. The way they'd laughed, not like wild things, but like they understood what fear felt like in a human chest. Like they'd seen it before and wanted me to know it. I lay there until the wind found me again and carried a new sound with it. Words, my words. Soft, wrong. My voice, but not mine. Somewhere not far, in a voice that sounded exactly like mine, I heard the words I'd said 2 nights ago by the fire. "You're not here for me, are you?" The way I'd said it, half a whisper, half a prayer, but now dragged across ice like a record slowing down. My head turned sharply. I didn't breathe. I waited. Then it said it again. "You're not here for me, are you?" Same voice, same cadence, except colder, hollow. Like the meaning had been scraped off the bones and only the sound was left behind. I pushed myself to my feet and scanned the trees. Nothing moved. The sound didn't echo, it just hung there. Then something cracked behind me. Wood, heavy, bending. I turned toward it, but the sound had already shifted. To my left, then my right. The voice again. This time, laughter after it. A short, low chuckle. Mine? They were mimicking. Not just noise, language. The way they spoke it back, testing how it sounded in their throat. Not animal sounds. Intention? I stumbled backward, boots sliding, and found myself at the edge of a narrow cut in the rock, barely a shoulder wide. A natural formation carved by time or frost, too tight for most things to squeeze into. But right now it looked like a coffin with a way out. I dropped down and wedged myself in. The stone was cold enough to numb my ribs the moment I touched it. I pulled my knees up to my chest and twisted until I fit. My boots stuck out the end useless, but my torso and face were hidden. My breath bounced off the rock and came back wet and fast. I switched off the flashlight. Total black. I didn't know how long I waited. Maybe minutes, maybe more. Then the crunch of snow. Close, measured. I held my breath. Something moved past the crevice. Slow. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Its mass, its temperature. The way its movement pressed air into the space with me. I bit my tongue so I wouldn't make a sound. Then the footsteps stopped. Right outside, there was silence. Then a soft knock. 3 times. On the rock right next to my face. Like it knew exactly where I was. And then, another voice. Not mine this time. Higher, ragged. A woman's voice. But warped. Like someone trying to remember what it sounded like from long ago. She said, help me? I froze. It was too perfect, too rehearsed. I didn't respond. The voice again, this time closer, just outside the crack. Help me, please. It was almost pleading, and then it changed. The same voice, but the tone twisted like it would... Amused now. It laughed, a short, sharp bark of breath, like it was enjoying the game. I pressed myself deeper into the crevice, arms locked around my chest. I felt it then, a touch. On my boot, something soft, heavy. It didn't grab, just rested there, as if to say, I know. Then it pulled away. The crunch of footsteps moved off, not rushed, not angry. Just leaving, but not gone. Not far. After what felt like a lifetime, I crawled out. Every part of me ached. My limbs were pins and needles. My back screamed. I moved slow, deliberate, scanning every angle before I stood. They hadn't killed me. They could have. But they hadn't. And I didn't know why. As I turned back toward where I thought camp had been, I caught a glimpse of the treetops shifting ahead. The sound of snow falling. Not from wind, from something shaking the branches. I moved carefully, staying low. No more running. Just tracking now. I stepped into a clearing and stopped cold. My tent was gone. Everything. The fire pit, the tarp, the logs I'd gathered, every trace of it. Except the camera, placed upright in the middle of the snow. Still recording, I approached it slowly, reached down and clicked stop. The battery light blinked red. I flipped through the playback, heart hammering. Frames of the clearing, empty. Then movement, shadows, figures entering the frame. 1, then 2, then 3. They moved around the camp, not smashing, not tearing. They observed, touched the gear. Tilted their heads, the way a person studies a puzzle. Then one of them walked up to the camera, leaned in. The screen turned black, except for one thing. Eyes, looking straight into the lens, not snarling, not angry, just calm, knowing. I dropped the camera back into my bag and looked around. Beside where the tent had been was a small pile of rocks again. But different this time. Not random, not just symbols. It was a shape, a figure. 1 large, 3 small, all arranged with perfect balance, facing the woods. And behind it, etched into the snow with 1 long finger, was a curved line with a slash through it. I didn't know what it meant, but it felt like memory, like a warning, or a map, or maybe something else entirely. I stood there until the wind picked up again and erased it slowly, and I whispered, I don't think you're trying to scare me anymore. But I was still scared, not of them, not exactly. I was scared because I knew whatever came next wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a choice. By the time I saw the tree line again, my legs were barely holding me up. 1 boot was soaked through, the other was slick with dried blood. I don't remember when my shoulder gave out. Somewhere after I slipped down that icy draw and hit the rocks full force. The pain hadn't faded, just blurred into the rhythm of survival. Step, grit teeth, breathe, step again. There was no more room in my head for panic, no fear left to feel. Just the sharp cold of knowing I was close. Close to the truck, close to the road, close to something I used to call safe. The woods behind me were silent. No footfalls, no breath, but I knew they were still back there. I didn't have to look. The air was heavier behind me than in front of me. The same way you know when a storm is right over your shoulder. How your skin prickles before the thunder even rolls. My hand shook as I pulled the keys from my coat. I almost dropped them. When the driver's door finally opened, I fell into the seat like I was crossing a finish line I never thought I'd see. The interior smelled like old coffee and cedar. That smell, normal, human, nearly broke me. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, shoulder throbbing, mouth dry. And for the first time since I'd entered those woods, I cried. No, not from pain, not from fear, but from something I still don't know how to explain. Maybe relief, maybe grief, maybe just knowing I wasn't the same man who parked this truck here 8 days ago. The engine coughed, then turned over. I backed out slow. Didn't look in the rearview mirror. Didn't have to. The road out of Selkirk was harder to follow than I remembered. The snow had thickened, but something, had cleared a line through the drifts. Subtle, just enough for tires to track through. I never saw another vehicle. Didn't pass a soul. Didn't want to. When I reached the highway, I drove another hour before the adrenaline burned off and the blood loss caught up. That's when I pulled into a ranger station off Route 95. Small place. A young guy at the front desk looked up, eyes going wide when he saw me. I told him I'd fallen on ice. Told him I was a hiker. Didn't mention the eyes. Didn't mention the voices. Didn't say a word about the camera. He called an ambulance anyway. By the time I woke up again, I was wrapped in warm sheets, IV in my arm, bandages tight across my shoulder. The nurse said I was lucky. A few more hours in the cold and they'd have found a body instead of a patient. I thanked her, meant it, but the real reason I'd made it out wasn't luck. It was mercy. Back home, the silence was louder than I remembered. The walls of the cabin didn't creak like the trees had. The wind didn't speak here. I stayed off my feet for a few days, ate small meals, slept too long. When I finally felt strong enough, I pulled the memory card from the camera and loaded it into my laptop. Most of the footage was static. Tree lines, snowfall, the edge of the firelight flickering over canvas and frost. But near the end, time-stamped the morning after I'd hidden in the rocks, there were 2 frames that didn't belong. The first one was almost empty. Just the woods, but in the lower right corner part of a hand, large, covered in dark hair. Still intentional, as if it had been placed there on purpose. Like they knew exactly what the lens could see. The second frame stopped my breath. A face, not fully lit, not screaming. Just looking, eyes fixed on the camera. Not glowing, not wild. Human almost, but older, more tired. There was something in that gaze that didn't want to frighten. Something that felt like grief. I stared at that image for a long time. Then I closed the laptop and didn't post it. Didn't report it. Didn't tell anyone what I'd seen in that lens. Because if I had shown them, they'd only see something to hunt, to cage, to dissect. And whatever they were, whatever still lives out there, they don't deserve that. They'd spared me. It's more than once. Not because they were afraid, but because they chose to. I pulled out my recorder one night, the one I used when journaling felt too heavy for my hands. And I said this: they're not myths, not shadows in the trees or stories whispered around campfires. They're real, but not in the way we think. They don't belong in cages or headlines. They belong to the land, to the cold, to the silence. I paused, then added, and now I think I do too. The tape clicked off. I looked at the window. Dark outside, wind moving gently through the pines. Not knocking this time. Just passing through. I didn't feel scared. Didn't feel watched. Just part of something bigger. I never went back to that place. Didn't need to. Because sometimes you don't need answers. You just need to be heard. And in those woods, I was... Sometimes what we fear isn't the unknown itself, but the mirror it holds up to us. In the heart of the wild, where maps blur and silence speaks louder than any voice, something ancient still watches. Something that doesn't fit into the pages of a book or the lens of a camera, but maybe it was never meant to. Maybe some truths were made not to be solved, but to be felt, to be respected. There are places in this world that don't need our footsteps, only our humility. Places where nature isn't just scenery, it's memory. Memory of what came long before us, of what still lingers when we think we're alone. Out there in the deep stillness, the lines between legend and reality aren't just blurred, they vanish completely. What's left is a quiet understanding that we are not the masters of this world. We're guests, temporary, fragile, curious, and often far less observant than we believe ourselves to be. But the wild sees us, and sometimes it lets us go, not because we earned it, not because we deserved it, but because compassion exists in places we never thought to look. And when it does, it humbles us in ways no fear ever could. In the end, not every mystery demands an answer. Some are meant to remain suspended in wonder, etched into the frost of forgotten forests, whispered through branches and carried on the breath of something we may never name. And maybe that's enough. Maybe knowing there's still something out there bigger than us, kinder than expected, and older than time itself, is what keeps the world worth exploring. If this story touched something inside you, left you with a question, a memory, or a feeling you can't quite shake, I'd love to hear it. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if these stories speak to you the way they speak through me, consider subscribing and joining us on the next quiet trail into the unknown. Thank you for walking with me this far.